You're standing in a garden, and someone hands you a single frame of honeycomb. You hold it up to the light. Hundreds of six-sided chambers, every wall exactly the same thickness, every angle exactly the same degree, every cell locking into the next with zero gaps and zero errors. You turn it over. Same thing. Perfect on both sides. No machine made this. No engineer signed off on the blueprint. No quality check caught the flaws. Just thousands of insects, each with a brain smaller than a sesame seed, somehow producing a structure so geometrically precise that mathematicians spent over 2,000 years trying to explain it. Here's the question that haunted scientists, philosophers, and architects for centuries. Why a hexagon? Of all the shapes in the world, why that one? And how does a bee, a creature, cannot measure build it perfectly, every single time? Welcome to Science Curiosity, let's get into it. Before we get to the shape, we need to understand what bees are actually building with, because the material itself is more extraordinary than most people realize. Bees don't collect wax. They produce it. Inside the hive, young worker bees load up on honey and put their bodies to work. Tucked underneath their abdomens are 8 tiny organs called wax glands. These glands slowly release thin, almost transparent flakes of raw beeswax, each one barely visible, barely the size of a grain of salt. But the cost of making those flakes is staggering. To produce just 1 single pound of beeswax, a bee must consume roughly 8 pounds of honey. 8 to 1. That ratio matters more than almost anything else in this story, because it means every fraction of wax the hive uses has to earn its place. Nothing can be wasted. Not a drop, not a flake. Once the wax appears, the bee scrapes it from her abdomen with her hind legs, passes it forward to her mandibles, and chews. She works the flake slowly, mixing it with saliva, softening it with the warmth of her own body, until it transforms from a brittle sliver into something pliable and ready to press into place. Multiply that process by thousands of bees working simultaneously, and you start to understand the scale of what's happening inside a single hive. All of that effort, all of that energy, all of that honey, just to make the raw material. Which is exactly why the geometry of what comes next matters so much. So, why the hexagon? Let's actually think through this carefully, because the answer isn't obvious and the wrong answers are surprisingly easy to fall for. Start with circles. Circles seem like a reasonable first guess. They're smooth, they're efficient at holding volume, and nature uses them constantly. But pack circles together and the problem appears immediately. Gaps form between them, small, crescent-shaped voids that hold nothing and serve no purpose. Those gaps would need to be filled with extra wax, wasting the colony's most precious resource. Circles are out. Squares then. Squares tile together, with no gaps at all. You've seen a bathroom floor. You know exactly how this works. Triangles do the same thing. No wasted space. Problem solved, right? Not quite. Because there's a second variable that squares and triangles fail to account for, and it's the one that changes everything. Perimeter. To divide the same total area into individual cells, both squares and triangles require more total wall length than hexagons do. More wall length means more wax. More wax means more honey burned to produce it. More honey burned means more foraging, more labor, more strain on the entire colony. The cost compounds. The hexagon is the one shape that solves both problems simultaneously. It tiles with no gaps, just like squares and triangles, but it does it using less total wall material than any other shape that can tile without gaps. It stores the maximum amount of honey for the minimum expenditure of wax. In 1999, mathematician Thomas Hales formally proved this in what's now called the Honeycomb conjecture, a mathematical problem that had been open since ancient Greece. It confirmed, with rigorous proof, what bees had been doing for millions of years before humans could even frame the question. Charles Darwin himself called the honeycomb a structure perfectly economizing both labor and wax, and he wasn't prone to exaggeration. So the mystery seemed solved. Bees build hexagons because hexagons are optimal. Evolution figured out the math. Case closed. Except it isn't. Here's where this story takes a turn that will completely change the way you see it. Bees don't build hexagons. I'll give you a moment with that. In 2013, scientists studying honeycombs that were still mid-construction found something nobody had predicted. The bees weren't starting with neat six-sided cells. They were building circles, rough, rounded, imperfect tubes of wax, pressed together without any visible geometric order. No hexagons. Not yet. So how does a comb full of circles become a comb full of perfect hexagons? The answer isn't intelligence. It isn't instinct. It isn't geometry. It's physics. Here's what's happening inside the hive that the naked eye never catches. Thousands of worker bees are constantly vibrating their flight muscles, not to fly, but specifically to generate heat. This collective effort keeps the interior of the comb at roughly 45 degrees Celsius during construction. At that temperature, beeswax doesn't stay rigid. It softens. It becomes semi-fluid, not liquid enough to collapse, but pliable enough to flow and reshape under pressure. And then, surface tension does the rest. You've seen what surface tension does to soap bubbles. When two bubbles press against each other, their shared wall doesn't crumple or fold unevenly. It flattens. It finds the most stable, lowest energy configuration possible and holds it. The same physical law governs the softened wax cells inside the hive. As the warm, pliable circular tubes press against each other from every direction, their walls flatten wherever two cells meet. The curves straighten. The angles settle. And slowly, inevitably, those rough circles reorganize themselves into stable, six-sided structures. The bees supply the material and the heat. Physics writes the geometry. What looks from the outside like deliberate architectural planning is actually the outcome of thermodynamics and surface tension operating on soft wax inside a warm, crowded space. The hexagon isn't designed. It emerges. The next time you hold a piece of honeycomb, you're not just holding wax shaped by insects. You're holding the visible record of a collaboration between biology, chemistry, thermodynamics, and the deep physical laws that govern how matter behaves under pressure and heat. The bees don't know any of this. They don't need to. Evolution handed them a process, and physics handed them a result, one so precise, so efficient, and so elegant that humanity needed 2,000 years, and a formal mathematical proof to fully understand it. The most sophisticated structures in nature are rarely the product of intelligence. They're the product of simple rules, applied consistently, under the right conditions, over a very long time. It was hiding in the honeycomb the whole time. If this kind of story is your thing, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And share this with someone who loves a good wait. Really? Moment. I'll see you in the next video.